welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're back with another game preview here. We've got UConn and BYU, this one being played in Boston Saturday night at 7 o'clock. This game obviously is highly touted, should be a lot of fun. AJ Dybantsa returning back home, where he played his first 2 years of high school, I believe. Should be a really entertaining game between two teams, of course, that are, widely regarded as potential Final Four national title contenders. We saw BYU, it hasn't been the prettiest for them thus far. We saw them in their last game against Delaware. They're down at halftime at home. They were kind of still back and forth for a bit in the second half until they went on, I believe, like a 17-4 run late or around like that 10-minute mark, I think, in the second half, and ultimately pulled away and, won by what, 17. But, it hasn't been perfect for them thus far, I think, like everyone maybe expected. And then on the UConn side, they've looked fantastic thus far. They've been, really good, really efficient. 13th in the country in effective field goal percentage. Shot the three well. They're 12th in the country in 2-point field goal percentage. They've just been a well-oiled, experienced machine at this point, behind Hurley and his staff. But Cody, what are your initial thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see the types of improvements that this UConn defense has made. We need to kind of see it in their first true test. And I think handling the dribble creation of AJ Dybantsa, I think, is going to be the biggest factor, along with Rob Wright, too, handling his dribble creation. BYU creating catch and shoot threes and even just creating rim attempts has been kind of their go-to. It's been their go-to since Kevin Young got here last year. I mean, BYU has a 44.6% field goal attempt percentage at the rim this year. I mean, that's in the 95th percentile. They're getting 29 rim attempts per game. Everywhere else they've been like a little getting shots up in those areas as often, and that's been like, I guess, a little bit of a concern with them is like, is their shooting ability like as high level as it is last year? But when you have AJ, an elite on-ball scorer, I think all those problems can pretty much go off to the wayside. But I will be interested to see how a guy like, is Karaban going to cover him for spurts of this game? Are they going to throw Jalen Stewart at him? I think he's probably the best candidate, at least to start it, and then you can move on to Karaban as like a wider frame guy if it doesn't really work out. But containing those guys and containing the overall dribble creation is the biggest key for UConn, and to really see what Tarris Reed is as the number one rim protector, the number one, and can he stay on the floor for long like last year? I know that was a true 50-50 split with him and Samson John. Foul trouble with him is something that we've been monitoring at least for the last year and change. Stay on the floor. He's like production wise, he has a 16.2% offensive rebound rate, 38.5% defensive rebound rate through 2 games so far. He's been great. He's been every bit of the hype that he's gotten all offseason, but he just needs to stay on the floor to because I don't know if I really trust Eric Ryba against big time competition right now. I think guys like Dybantsa and Rob Wright can kind of get what they want if they're able to blow by their men on the perimeter. But for UConn, it's the perimeter shot creation against this BYU defense that has tended to pack it in a little bit more. They're able to do a little bit more than they did last season. They didn't really have the athleticism on the perimeter to really extend their defense, and like their point of attack defense was at real risk when they did that. And they're still packing it in a little bit. They're still giving up their share of threes, their share of catch and shoot threes, but their athleticism should at least help eliminate those unguarded ones at a higher frequency. But this is going to be one of the hardest teams to guard in the country in UConn. It obviously starts with the shooting of Alex Karaban and solo ball. It would be nice for them to have Braylon Mullins for this matchup, but they still have so many shooters at their disposal that I'm not sure it's really going to matter. And now, I mean, you have a point guard who can actually create and get downhill in Silas Demary to create more of these shrink threes, which I think is going to be a massive key in this game. So yeah, I'm very excited to see I mean, the pace too. I think it's going to be a sneaky slow pace game. Both teams are playing a little bit slower. I think BYU's kind of settled the pace down a little bit, trying to value a little bit more transition defense, but it doesn't matter, right? The UConn could be the best half court offense in the entire country. So I'm very excited to see how both defenses, I think, react more than the offenses.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, right, it was something I noticed, like both teams are playing probably a little bit slower than I would have expected. Particularly BYU, and to me, like a slower paced game here really favors UConn just because of how well coached they are, how experienced they are. I think they can really get shots that they want and how well they've been shooting the ball, right? Like BYU is going to give up the three ball, right? Like you said, they've been packing it in. Their 3-point rate is 43.8% on the defensive end. UConn's shooting it at 40%. So I expect UConn to really get a bunch of clean looks in this game, and then if they don't knock those down, right? They've been on the offensive glass, particularly Tarris Reed, right? 16% offensive rebound rate. Karaban's been good on the offensive glass. Both those guys I think can have some success here in this game. Particularly against the BYU team that like hasn't been phenomenal on the defensive glass in like against teams that aren't great on the offensive glass or don't have like two bye games and Villanova, and Villanova doesn't really have a superb front court presence to be on the offensive glass. So it's not like they've been great. And I think like Tarris Reed's the best offensive rebounding big they're going to have played up to this point. So I think they can have some success there. But I really think a slower pace really favors this UConn team's experience and coaching. If it gets out and runs a little bit more, like then you've got guys like Rob Wright and Dybantsa and Saunders, who we saw last year, and some like Saunders, especially in some of those really fast-paced games against like Arizona, he can really get it going. And Wright and Dybantsa are no stranger, I don't think, to faster-paced games. So I think if it stays slower paced, I certainly favor UConn. The one thing, like you mentioned about Tarris Reed to monitor is the fouling. And so far through the two games he's played, he's been good, right? 2.9 fouls per 40 in 21 minutes a game. I think he's in a better spot here in this matchup just because, you're playing Kebaketa, who, he's going to be on him. They're not going to play through him, right? So as long as he's like disciplined on the glass and not picking up cheap ones there, I think he's going to be all right. So, I'd look for him to get to be able to play a little bit more in this game than maybe we would have expected a year ago. I assume that, Hurley's had some conversations with him to kind of reel that in because they do really need him on the floor, right? It's been a concern, really the main concern with this UConn team because they just don't have a ton of depth or proven depth in the front court. But, for UConn, if they're going to win this game, it's, if they can keep the pace slow, they're going to be very comfortable in this game. BYU is not going to be a team that's forcing a bunch of turnovers, which again, I think is something that favors UConn substantially. If they're comfortable in the half court and able to really get to their sets and get what they want, it really sets up well for UConn in a game that's going to be, like, yes, AJ Dybantsa is going to have some fans there for it being a homecoming, but UConn, this is going to be a home game for UConn pretty much. So, I think it sets up well for them.
Yeah, I would agree. But for BYU, I mean, I just think, they're just going to have to do a better job of, eliminating the catch and shoot three at a high level. They're going to have to extend their defense a little bit and bother them with more of their, just more of their athleticism across the board. Like obviously Dybantsa is a good on-ball defender when he's engaged. I know there's some, off-ball defense and just he's not locked in maybe 100% of the time on the defensive end. Maybe gets lost, doesn't play within the scheme as often as you would like. But they do have some other wing athletes. Like Saunders is a fine defender for a wing. Kennard Davis, I think, could be a real game changer for this defense. And I think one of the most fun big man matchups of the year that nobody's really talking about is going to be Kebaketa against Tarris Reed. They're very similar in the ways they want to play. They're built very similarly. It's going to be very fun to see who wins the rebound battle there. But But yeah, ultimately, I do think UConn is just slightly better on both ends of the floor. And, the fact that they're playing, I guess we could basically call this a home game. I'll call it a semi-home game. This is going to be, UConn North, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I just think they're a little bit more of a finished product, even though we haven't seen them play against any high level competition yet. And we have seen BYU, and this is a BYU defense that kind of got stretched out by Villanova with all of their spacing. And I know Nova didn't knock it down at a super high clip. They shot at 10 for 35, but UConn wants to shoot the three at a similar volume. And I think they can get to their catch and shoot threes in easier ways than a Kevin Willard offense can do. So I do trust them to knock down a few more shots than BYU.
Yeah, I agree. Which that leads us into game picks. You sounds like you've already made yours. I'm going to go with UConn as well. I don't. Is there a spread out on this game yet?
There isn't. I would assume it's around 5, just factoring in for the semi-home game.
Yeah, I actually think UConn can kind of sneakily get this thing, like win this thing by closer to 10. I just think BYU is not quite ready yet. I'm going to say like UConn wins 76 to 68.
Yeah, I'm like kind of in that same ballpark from point differential wise. I'll say it's a little bit higher scoring because I think the offenses are in decent spots to succeed. I'll go 84 to 78.
Cool. So we'll see what happens. Should be a really fun game at TD Garden on Saturday night. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching the Mainely Hoops podcast.